would absolutely be an undoubted, unquestionable mandate because of the precedent. Listen, hang on a second. Here's Anna Sarwar's declaration. Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock. I'll come back to you, Ailsa. Let's hear what's happening there.
71. The total number of votes cast was 32,388. The turnout was 48.87%. There were 210 rejected ballots in total, with the reasons for rejection as follows: 14 voting for more than one candidate, 196 unmarked or void for uncertainty. The total number of votes for each candidate was as follows: Zengani, Scottish National Party, 14,270. Peter Michael McLaughlin, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 1,407. Kyle Park, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 1,325. Adnan Zafir Rafiq, Scottish Common Party, 163. Yvonne Ann Ridley, Workers' Party of Britain, 586. Anas Sarwar, Scottish Labour Party, 9,107. Kim Schmulian, Reform UK, 5,320. I, Suzanne Miller, declare that Zengani is elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament as a member for the Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock constituency.
So, Zengani is the new MSP for Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock. He had a notional majority, defending a notional majority there of 22%. He was the youngest councillor in Glasgow at just 24, grew up in Cahir, worked for Nicola Sturgeon as a staffer, Zengani, and he has very comprehensively seen off Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader in Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock, with a majority of just over 5,000. Let's Reform behind him on 5,320, behind Anas Sarwar, that is, and Lib Dems, Tories and Yvonne Ridley for the Workers' Party, taking up the rest of the votes. Let's have just a very quick look at the vote share there, shall we? Yeah, 44% to the SNP, 28% to Labour, 17% to Reform. And a quick look, Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock, at the Change. SNP holding it despite losing 10% of their vote. That is the story there. Ailsa, let me just come back to you. We were talking about mandates. John Swinney wouldn't say whether he would take a significant chunk of the vote below 65%, it was a chunk of seats, with an independence majority as a mandate for demanding a referendum. What do the public think constitutes a mandate for an independence referendum? You crunch these numbers.
Yeah, there's a lot in them. And the short answer is that you have to look first at people's constitutional preferences, because there are stark differences between yes supporters and no supporters. But if you ask the electorate as a whole, is there already a mandate? Would a mandate depend on an election result, or no election could ever deliver a mandate? Then 1 in 5 say an election is capable of delivering a mandate. 40%, by contrast, say no election result could ever deliver a mandate. But then if you look at the outcomes of elections, you can see clear differences again. 65% of people say that an SNP majority would deliver a mandate to hold a referendum. There are differences between yes and no supporters, but even the no supporters who believe any election could deliver a mandate say yes, an outright SNP majority would deliver that mandate to hold a referendum. But if it drops to a pro-independence majority, it's about 50%, and there's a bigger gap between the interpretations of yes and no supporters. No supporters are not convinced that a pro-independence majority alone would deliver a mandate to hold a referendum.
Unsurprisingly.
And if it's the last one of SNP wins more votes than anyone else, so no reference to a pro-Indy or an SNP majority, then it's 1 in 5. And there's no difference between yes and no supporters. So not even yes supporters believe that SNP, largest party, is enough to be a mandate for calling a referendum.
And you said, well, pro-independence majority, 50% of the country.
Pro-independence majority.
Believe that's a majority.
50%.
50%. So the country's completely split on what the election result that we anticipate we're going to end up with means.
It's 50% of 20%.
Ah, 50%
So
of
it's 10% of the electorate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Listen, Alan Rodden is back on the panel. Significant Labour figure, somebody with his ear to the ground in Labour circles. Labour were saying, up until a couple of days ago, I tell you what, we're massively underpriced. The polling's wrong. We're going to do much better than you think. Boy, did they get that wrong. What's happened?
They were absolutely convinced the pollsters were wrong. They were basing this on the by-election in Hamilton last year, where Scottish Labour did win that against what the polls were predicting. Something has gone wrong in this campaign, because only yesterday people in the party were talking up seats like Cope Bridge, where there was a huge majority for the SNP. You know, East Lothian was seen as almost a safe win, and that's gone held by the SNP
Yesterday
as well.
they were talking these up.
Absolutely.
How can that go? So, I mean, look, in the last couple of by-elections we've had, where the polls where Labour said the polls are wrong, we'll win these.
Yep.
Rutherglen, Hamilton, they did. They defied the pollsters, they defied the pundits, they won them. That same logic, that same methodology has gone into this, and they couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah. So I think what's happened is, in a by-election where you focus all your resources in one seat, you can crunch that data really carefully. They've spread this across in a national election, and they just haven't been able to get the data accurate in this case. So, I mean, some of these wins for the SNP are really significant as well. Glasgow and Island, again, another one that actually was being talked up a few weeks ago. You know, Donald Dew's old seat, you know, and another huge victory for the SNP.
I'm just conscious that when Bernard Ponsonby clears his throat imperiously like that, he's got something to say.
No, I'm just going to make the point that Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, you know, you had the by-election programme, and people were downplaying Labour's chances, although Labour were not privately downplaying their own chances. They actually win that. Well, we now have the result in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, and it's the SNP who have won it. They've won it with 37% of the vote. Davy Russell, who won the by-election, down to 29%. Reform at 23%. Remember, Reform in the by-election from a standing start got 25% of the vote. They've got 23% of the vote here. So not only is that worrying for Labour, but if you look at a whole series of what you would call traditional central belt constituencies, which historically are fought between Labour and the SNP, the Labour Party, having comprehensively won Westminster constituencies in the Central Belt 2 years ago, are not laying a glove on the SNP, and they're not laying a glove on the SNP when, in share terms, across the country, the SNP share of the vote is down. So Labour really do have to go back to the drawing board. I'll simply reiterate the point that I made some times ago. It's horses for courses. It really is. So people can distinguish between what their intention is at a Westminster election, looking at the circumstances of that, and it's quite different from how they look at a Scottish Parliament election.
But that result, Alan Rodden, in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, kind of backs up what you were saying, because Davy Russell won that in the by-election with a really, really hard local campaign, out on every doorstep. There were Labour activists up from the southwest of England campaigning for him in that, and it's borne fruit. But they couldn't replicate that. It was too big an ask to spread it right across the country. That result there is exactly what you're saying.
Exactly. Right? They were trying to win 38 constituencies, which is a huge spread, because that was the way they saw forming a government. But the challenge now, or the concern for Labour, will be having focused all those resources on these constituencies which they haven't won. When we get to the regional votes in an hour or two, Labour did not run any campaign focused on that peach ballot paper. So it could be, you know, this could be a really bad result in the next few hours for Scottish Labour.
Well, I tell you what, there are plenty of questions to be asked and answered in Scottish Labour headquarters. Phil Sim pops up when he's got something to say, and I'm told he's popping up again. There he is. Hello.
Yes, I mean, constituencies are so overripe. We've had loads of constituencies. Let's start to think about regions, because some of the seats, which have declared a while back now, have started to count up their regional list ballots, so the famous peach ballot paper. And we're starting to see interesting indications of people voting differently on their different ballot papers. So Shetland, seismic result, the SNP take the seat from the Lib Dems, getting 5,500 lilac constituency ballots to the Lib Dems 4,000. But on the peach regional paper, the Lib Dems actually got more votes. They actually got 3,500 local regional votes to the SNP's 3,000. And you say, OK, where have those SNP list votes gone? Well, the Greens went from 900 constituency votes to 1,800 list votes. So all of that is going to be very important when they start to tot up the overall regional picture, when you get these top-up regional list seats in terms of who is going to end up taking seats across the region. And interesting early indications that people are voting differently on those ballots. So it's very tempting to look around the country and say, hey, look, Reform have got 25% in that seat in Glasgow. Does that mean they're going to get a huge number of list MSPs in Glasgow? Maybe they will, but we have to wait and see what happens on those regional ballots, because we're seeing already people do use those two ballot papers differently.
Yeah, that split ticket voting is definitely a subject that's worthy of further conversation when we start to get those regional results in. Phil Sim, thank you very much indeed for that. There's Holyrood. Should we go back there? Rebecca Curran is sitting just outside the Parliament with a panel of guests. Rebecca, what are they telling you?
Thanks very much, Martin. Well, I'm now joined by Wendy Chamberlain, the Lib Dem MP, Laura Anderson, climate activist and environmental scientist, and Joanna Cherry, the former SNP MP. Welcome all, and thanks for being here. Wendy, I want to start with you because we've just heard a bit about that BBC forecast, and your party has questions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think you're currently forecasting 4 to 5 seats now. We already have had announcements in Fife North East with my constituency colleague Willie Rennie, the taking of Edinburgh Northern from the SNP, as well as Liam MacArthur in Orkney. Now, we're expecting, obviously, Alex Cole-Hamilton to hold his seat in Edinburgh North Western, and we're looking at good results in Strathkelvin and Bearsden, Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. So I think you're at the lower end of our expectations. Indeed, I think we're going to burst them.
Are you feeling quite confident this afternoon?
Yeah, I think obviously we've had a difficult announcement in Shetland.
Yeah.
You know, my heart goes out to Emma MacDonald. Congratulations to Hannah Goodlad, but she's made a lot of promises that she now needs to deliver on. But no, I think, you know, we have been very clear about our targeting strategy. And when you look at those 10 constituency seats that we were targeting, I think a number of them are going to come in our direction.
Joanna Cherry, what do you make of the forecast?
Well, I think, you know, Labour are having a pretty shocking result. Reform don't seem to be doing as well as predicted. The SNP are hanging on to seats, but with a considerably reduced share of the vote. Yes, there's a few people bucking the trend. My friend and former colleague Patricia Gibson has just got a fantastic result with a much higher percentage than the SNP average in Cunningham South. And of course, Hannah Goodlad has won in Shetland, which is an outstanding result, really. But my real question for the in relation to the SNP is, are they going to make the majority 65? And it doesn't look like it at the moment, but it's not impossible. As I've said before, I think it was very unwise of John Swinney to peril the SNP's independence project on getting that outright majority, because it looks like there is going to be a pro-independence majority in the Parliament, and that's what really matters. All
parties. I have to interrupt. We're going to a declaration in Edinburgh North.
The total number of votes given to each candidate was as follows: David Lees, Reform UK, 2,746. Ben Macpherson, Scottish National Party, 13,630. Kate Nevins, Scottish Green Party, 10,559. Liz Owen, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 1,895. Oliver Thomas, Scottish Labour Party, 7,894. And Harris Young, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 1,297. Therefore, I give public notice that Ben Macpherson is duly elected as the member of the Scottish Parliament for the Edinburgh North Eastern and Leith constituency.
So, Edinburgh North East and Leith constituency, the SNP hold that. Ben McPherson on 13,630 votes. But look at that performance from the Greens. Kate Nevins on 10,559 in third. Labour's Oliver Thomas on 7,894. Reform's David Lees in fourth place on 2,746. And the Lib Dems' Liz Owen on 1,895. And finally, the Conservatives' Harris Young on 1,297. So that's an SNP hold in Edinburgh North East and Leith. Joanna Cherry, I'll pick up there with you because you were discussing the SNP there. I mean, what do you make of that result?
Well, I'm pleased to see Ben hang on to his seat because he's an old friend of mine, and I didn't think much of the Green candidate's position on a number of issues which seemed to be really a bit crazy. But I think the real shocking result in Edinburgh is Angus Robertson coming in third in Edinburgh Central. It's really quite an indictment that an incumbent SNP cabinet secretary has been beaten into third place by essentially someone who, when they were a cabinet secretary, was widely pilloried in the post. But I think there's a number of reasons for the result in Edinburgh Central relating to Angus's lack of presence on the ground in the constituency. He didn't do in-person surgeries. There's a great disaffection in the SNP Central branch, which was my branch when I was a member, a great feeling that Angus wasn't really doing anything to advance the cause of independence. And I know a lot of the young Scottish nationalists wouldn't campaign for Angus because they were disgusted by his closeness to the current Israeli government in the light of what they've done in Gaza and the West Bank. So I think there's been a number of issues coming there and pushing Angus into third place, but it's a pretty shocking result for the SNP in Edinburgh Central, which should have been a safe seat for them.
OK, Laura, what do you make of what you've seen so far? I mean, we saw that win for Lorna Slater in Edinburgh. We saw a really good performance there from the Greens coming in second.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this election has been dominated by the cost of living. That's what people have been hearing on the doorstep. That's what people's main concern is about. And a lot of that is linked to issues that the Greens are very vocal about. It's how much petrol is costing at the pump. It's your energy bills. It's even things like food and groceries that is impacted globally by what we've been seeing the last few weeks with this conflict. So I think the Greens are going to be delivering more MSPs than they've ever had before. And part of that will be down to some of their traditional Green messaging around energy, climate, sustainability, but linking that to the cost of living. And of course, Lorna Slater returning as an MSP, but this time as a constituency MSP will be very encouraging for them. But I do think, you know, it speaks to a big topic that has been across all of the parties, which has been this idea of energy and cost of living and the various messaging across the parties. Some of it has been strong and has led people to select who to vote for. Others times it's been confusing and has left people going, I don't know who to vote for. And that's why we're maybe seeing some of the lower turnouts in some areas as well, where we would expect more.
I mean, I totally agree with you, Laura. I think the cost of living and energy issues are so important to most voters. But the problem with the Scottish Greens is that when they actually get into the Parliament, they tend to put their energies into identity politics rather than actually furthering the issues and the reasons why people vote for them. And they've had some very intolerant positions towards women like me, lesbian, gay and bisexual people who don't buy their identity politics. I'd like to see the Scottish Greens put that aside and focus on issues like the cost of living and the energy crisis. But frankly, I'll be surprised if they do.
Wendy, you were nodding along at the start there.
Yeah, I think cost of living is something that has come up consistently because it really, really is difficult for people. And when I think about a constituency such as mine, where Willie Rennie has just been returned in a large part of that, you know, it's cost of living in relation to energy and fuel, but also the fact that public services are not what they once were, particularly around local transport, etc. So all those different factors add up to make things very difficult for people in their day-to-day lives.
OK, thank you all very much for the moment. And we'll go back now to Martin in Glasgow.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. So just, I mean, that result in Edinburgh Central, you know, Angus Robertson losing out to Lorna Slater of the Greens. The Greens doing also very well in Edinburgh Southern, wasn't it, where Ben McPherson just won. Kate Nevins, by the way, Joanna Cherry was just talking about her there. You may remember, if you were wondering, where do I know that name from through the campaign? Kate Nevins was the candidate who said she wanted to abolish prisons. That's perhaps what Joanna Cherry was referring to. We've got a couple of new campaigners on our desk here. To my right, Blair Jenkins, who ran the Yes campaign all those years ago now. Crikey, it seems like a lifetime ago. 12 years ago in 2014. What are you making of what you're seeing today? What's the story of this election so far for you, Blair?
I think the fact that we are seeing undoubtedly a much more fragmented electorate and voting for several different parties, which is what I think was expected. And in a way, I suppose, in Scotland, we've been much more used to a multi-party system, perhaps, than the rest of the UK over the last 20, 25 years. So not a surprise that it's been such a split vote, such a fragmented vote, but some fascinating local results, and I think one or two that I certainly didn't expect. So very interesting.
Yeah, we won't know the full story really until we see the regional declarations either, will we? Because of that split ticket voting phenomenon. We have no idea how the Parliament's going to be made up yet, not even who will come second.
That's true, that's true. And I know you're going to ask me at some point very shortly about whether or not the SNP will or should be trying to secure a new independence referendum. And I think the point I'd want to make fairly early on today is it looks to me like the way things are shaping up, they have a very strong case in partnership with the Scottish Greens.
Even though they didn't say, they declared very specifically that they wouldn't use it to that end. Well, actually, perhaps they didn't.
I'm not sure. I mean, I can't say. I didn't hear every speech or read every article in the campaign. I don't have to do that anymore.
Well, they said what a mandate was, and they didn't say it was a pro-independence majority. Stop mucking about, don't vote for the Greens.
What I don't think I heard George Swinney say was that he wouldn't regard a pro-independence majority as a mandate for a new referendum. What he said was that the clearest indication or the clearest way of getting a new referendum was an SNP majority. But the point I was going to make, and it's actually, I think it's a very important one, there is a very important precedent here. And it's not the last Scottish referendum, it's the EU referendum. Because when the Conservatives went ahead with that referendum 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago, they did so on the basis of having won just over 50% of the constituencies in the 2015 general election on a share of the vote of 37%. Now, not only did they regard that as a mandate, but the other Westminster parties also regarded it as a mandate and voted for that legislation as it went through Parliament. It looks on the BBC forecast as though the SNP are on track to win about 80%, not 50%, about 80% of the constituencies in Scotland on a higher share of the vote than the Conservatives had in 2015.
How many times do they need to go to Westminster with a pro-independence majority and say, here's our mandate, and be rejected before they realise that that's just not going to work?
But there's a democratic point here. We can't have double standards democracy. If that share of the vote and that percentage of constituency victories was an uncontested mandate, and I see Bernard nodding, which is a good sign, always a good sign. If that was an uncontested mandate by the other parties at Westminster for the EU referendum, then here we have the SNP with a stronger result than that, doing better than that. Now, I'll be around for a while. Can anybody tell me why that doesn't constitute a mandate?
You're doing my job for me brilliantly. You anticipated a question that I hadn't asked, then answered it, and now you're bringing Bernard in, which is fantastic. Exactly what I was about to do.
As your former boss, I'm entitled to do that.
No, I knew you were going to say that. You didn't give me a job. You interviewed me and didn't give me a job. I had to wait. It was like failing at Westminster and then getting in at the next Holyrood election. Your successor employed me. You saw through me. That's the truth. Bernard, what do you make of that? Was in 1993.
To a certain extent, this whole issue of what constitutes a mandate, you can get into all sorts of arguments about this. What we know is what the constitutional position is, and that is that you can go to the Westminster Parliament and the First Minister can request a consented process as you have in 2014. There is no legal mechanism that the First Minister can fall back on in order to deliver that, because the constitutional settlement, whether you like it or not, and the Supreme Court has made this point, the Scottish Parliament does not have the responsibility to organise a referendum on an issue which is reserved to the UK Parliament. Now, the question in that sense is the current arrangements upheld by the Supreme Court fit for purpose in a modern democracy? Because there is a world of difference between saying that you should have the right to hold a referendum. That is a completely separate issue about whether or not that constitutional option is good for the country or not. They're two separate issues. And, you know, you have a trigger mechanism for a border poll in Northern Ireland. I think that the issue here is that they have to go back and look at the provisions of the Scotland Act, because when the Scotland Act was going through the House of Commons, and the reason why Alex Salmond campaigned with Donald Dewar for a yes vote in September 1997 is that Donald Dewar put it on the record, it's in Hansard, that if the people of Scotland wished to move to independence, that of course was their democratic right. Now, what was enshrined in the Scotland Act was this consented Section 30 process, but the practical political effect of that legal stipulation is that Westminster effectively has a veto forever and a day. And therefore the question is whether or not you think that that legal veto is something which sits comfortably with the notion of democracy.
Right. I think we can safely say it's not going away, this question. There's plenty to discuss. And
the only issue is, do we have a constitutional crisis by the end of this election? And that depends on how the First Minister answers the second question that you asked him about an hour and a half ago, which he didn't want to be drawn on.
Well,
because he's going to have to ask the question, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to pursue this question? And will there be a constitutional standoff between you and the Prime Minister?
Right. We have... Blair, just hold that thought a second, because we have another new guest on the panel. To my left, Murray Macklin is here, Ayrshire businesswoman. I don't know how else to introduce you other than that, but I've interviewed you in the past for your support for Donald Trump, for example. Who are you backing? Are you a Reform backer officially in this election?
Malcolm Offal's a good friend of mine, so I have supported Malcolm in this instance, yeah.
So what do you think of the performance so far? I mean, the one constituency we thought they might have a chance in was Banffshire and Buchan Coast. They didn't win that.
Absolutely. I think what we're going to have to wait and see is when the votes come out later tonight over at Ingliston for the regional situation. But as I sit here, first of all, I want to congratulate Alan Brown, SNP, who's won the Kilmarnock constituency where I'm from. He's a hard-working MP, and he's now going to be up in Holyrood. And we need to see quality people up there. I think from a reform point of view, you're now seeing the working class communities basically take that swing, and it is coming away from, obviously, the Labour Party. And Anis obviously came out eloquently and said what he said, a couple of hours ago. And it's a big disappointment to see Anis having to say that, because I know how he's worked around the business communities, and really, this was his time.
What do you think went wrong for us? I mean, the Labour Party used to feel that they owned the working class vote in Scotland. They were punished for that. Complacency as far as the working class vote. When a lot of that vote shifted to the SNP, Reform are now coming in and eating up a chunk of that, aren't they?
Absolutely. I come from the coal mining community, so I saw Kilmarnock and Ayrshire and other coal mining communities fall by the hands of politics across Labour and Conservative policies from the 1970s. And now, I think the challenge is that these heartfelt communities, the deprived communities that I work in across the whole of the UK and in Belfast, they're scunnered. That word's scunnered. And that's why they're voting the way they're voting.
Well, how do you think a big Reform presence in Holyrood would make a difference? Say they have 20 seats in Holyrood. What can they do?
Yeah, I think where the Parliament needs to go is this word, right, centre-right, seems to be such a bad word. And if you speak to the business community, only the CBI came out this morning and said there's a 5 billion black hole coming towards us, so how are we going to fill that? And you're going to fill that with doing 3 things. Either increase tax, increase driving the economy forward, or huge public sector cuts. And what I want to see, and what the business community want to see, is driving forward that economy. So what I think that Malcolm Offord, with his experience from the finance world and business, would bring a presence of driving forward and pressure onto the government to drive forward proactive business policy.
OK, Blair Jenkins, we think we're going to get a declaration Glasgow in a minute, but we're waiting to see what John Swinney does with what Swinneyism is. And there are early indications he's going to move away, perhaps, from the very progressive agenda of Nicola Sturgeon, continued by Humza Yousaf. Do you think he's going to listen to the pleas? The business community have been pleading for so long now. Listen to us, help us, help us. Do you think he's going to move there?
Well, I don't know, and I'm not privy to any of the thinking of John and the people around him. What I would say about him, and I'm sure Mary would agree that John is an essentially very pragmatic and reasonable guy, as well as being a very principled guy. So I think it seems to me that he would be in listening mode for whichever part of our society, whichever part of our economy wants to talk to him. Whether he makes a significant political shift, I wouldn't have thought so.
Do you think, Bernard? I mean, you're shaking your head.
Well, so Tom Hunter was on here some hours ago, and in a sense what he was saying was a plea for business, that politicians talk about the need for economic growth, because if you want to fund your public services but you don't want to have to cut your public services, you need to have economic growth. Now, here's the rub. If we are headed towards a $5 billion black hole in the public finances, and you don't want to increase taxes, and I think the parties were perfectly clear in the election that they don't want to, then you're going to have to cut services.
Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire declaring now.
58. Rachel Hamilton, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 13,483. Terry Howson, Alliance to Liberate Scotland, 165. Kay Marie Hughes, Scottish Labour Party, 1,577. Jamie Alexander Langan, Reform UK, 3,569. John Redpath, Scottish National Party, 8,206. Therefore, I give public notice that Rachel Hamilton is duly elected as the member of the Scottish Parliament.
There we go. Conservatives holding Ettrick and Roxburgh. Rachel Hamilton going back for another term as the MSP for that part of the country. It was said at the start of this, wasn't it, that the Tories had 3 seats sweeping across the south of Scotland that the SNP really needed to eat into if they're to have any chance of that 65-seat majority. The Tories have held all 3 of those seats. That is the story from that part of the country. Let's get the story across the country as a whole, though. A news update now with Laura Miller.
Thank you, Martin. The BBC has predicted that the SNP will win between 59 and 63 seats in the Scottish Parliament. That would make them the biggest party by far and almost certainly take them back into power. But they won't get an overall majority as they did in 2011. So that's the headline, but let's take a look at the state of play so far. This is how things are shaping up. Let's pick out some big results behind these numbers so far, though. The Greens have won their first ever Scottish constituency and claimed a significant SNP scalp in doing so. Former co-leader Lorna Slater has taken Edinburgh Central from Cabinet Minister Angus Robertson. The Liberal Democrats have lost the party's traditional stronghold seat of Shetland to the SNP, and Labour have made a surprise gain in the Western Isles, taking the Helan and Anyer seat from the SNP. Let's hear from the Greens, though.
I want to thank the campaign volunteers and Scottish Green members and staff who ran the best campaign we've ever had. The sheer number of volunteers, new people coming every week, the level of planning, design, organisation over months has been phenomenal. And thank you to everyone who voted Scottish Green yesterday. I'm grateful for your trust in me and your trust in our vision for a fairer and greener Scotland.
Well, we've been concentrating on the seats won and lost so far, but let's take a moment to look at the vote share. Reform are the biggest gainers, but haven't won any seats. The SNP's vote is down around 9%, while Labour's Anas Sarwar seemed to concede defeat after just 7 seats were declared. His party's share of the vote is down just 2% as things stand. Not what he'd hoped for, but not the scale of losses seen in England and Wales. The Scottish Conservatives, however, have lost 10% of their share, apparently as a result of the rise of Reform. Here is how Craig Hoy, winner of the Dumfriesshire seat, responded to the results so far.
We've already lost, potentially, strong Conservative voices, pro-UK voices in the Scottish Parliament because of the actions in reform in the North East, in Aberdeenshire, in Eastwood and potentially in Ayr. So I think what this talks to is what we warned of and what I was warning of here, which is that a vote for reform basically hands seats that should be in pro-UK hands to John Swinney.
OK, let's head south of the border because there's also a picture unfolding in England. It doesn't make great reading for Labour. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says he's not going to walk away after results show Reform picking up seats in former Labour heartlands. Reform have made massive gains and are the biggest party by far. Labour have lost over 600 councillors. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage says the result so far represents a truly historic shift in British politics. But there is still a way to go. Meanwhile, in Wales, the results are coming through thick and fast. At the moment, Plaid Cymru and Reform are the big winners, as you'll see, with Plaid pulling ahead there. Labour have already conceded that they will not be in power after this election and said First Minister Eluned Morgan may lose her seat. The leader of Reform in Wales, Dan Thomas, told the BBC he was confident his party would be in a good position to form the next government in Cardiff.
We'd have to look at the numbers and the support that we get. You know, a lot of the other parties have said that they wouldn't work with us. I don't think that's a mature way to do business in this kind of situation. But look, we'll do our best to form a government.
59%. There were 172 rejected ballots in total, with the reasons for rejection as follows. 21 voted for more than one candidate. 2, writing or mark by which the voter could be identified. 149 unmarked or void for uncertainty. The total number of votes for each candidate was as follows. Arzur Bakir Abdullah, Independent, 147. Holly Bruce, Scottish Green Party, 14,000. Scottish Labour Party, 7,300. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 1,383. Gordon Miller, Reform UK, 3,019. Rachel Mary Byrne-Hart, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 1,143. Pocap Stewart, Scottish National Party, 10,000.
I want to start by thanking my parents, all 4 of you. Your support has been the foundation that allowed me to stand for something bigger than myself. To my dad, we had some difficult conversations when I decided to trade a career in law for the unpredictability of politics. If today isn't the day to finally convince you that it was the right decision, I'm not sure what will be. I think many people know that I live and I breathe the South Side. The victory isn't just mine. It belongs to all of you. To the hundreds of Green volunteers that have came out to tap 20,000 doors, thank you. Community to me isn't just a buzzword. It looks like meetings held round my kitchen table and rolling posters in the living room. It's the last-minute runs to Amy's to print speeches, the late-night texts after canvassing saying, I think we can do this, and the strangers shouting, "Mon the Greens." I want to pay homage to the women from the many election cycles ago who should be standing where I am today. Kim Long, Nadia Kinyange, Zara Kitson and Martha Wardrop. We have been working so hard to get a woman elected.
Right, you are watching Holly Bruce, the new MSP for Glasgow Southside, Nicola Sturgeon's old constituency. She has just defeated COCAB Stewart, the Equalities Minister in the Scottish Parliament, by a majority of more than 3,100. The Green story is developing into quite a thing, isn't it? They had their eyes on Glasgow Southside during the campaign. Massive campaign. You heard Holly Bruce talking about it there. She is a Glasgow councillor, traded in, as she said, a career in law for a career in politics. She has graduated from Glasgow Council to Holyrood now, where she is going as the MSP for Glasgow Southside. So, I'm saying the Greens are turning into one of the big stories of the day. Let's speak to their former co-leader and now MSP for Edinburgh Central, Lorna Slater. Lorna Slater, congratulations.
Thank you so much. I've just seen Holly's result. 2 constituencies.
Yeah, I mean, you were the first ever Green MSP to win a constituency, and now within half an hour there are 2.
Yeah, by about 20 minutes. Well, Holly and her team have done such a great job. Holly is going to be a great MSP. We absolutely weren't really expecting that, so I'm blown away. 2 constituencies is amazing for us.
Yeah, my editor is telling me in my ear they're like free buses. You wait forever for a Green constituency MSP, then 2 come along at once. What'd you put it down to?
We're doing our very best with the buses.
Yeah. What'd you put it down to?
It's down to a couple of things. One is a long history of Greens in Holyrood and in our councils. We've had Greens in the Holyrood Parliament ever since it was reconvened, and we've had councillors in Glasgow and Edinburgh for the last 20 years. So we've developed that experience, that track record, and we've been building support. So this is a new milestone for the Scottish Greens in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and it shows how that progressive agenda really has support, especially from young people.
It's interesting. The Green agenda used to be an exclusively environmental agenda, and you're not describing it as that anymore. It's a progressive agenda. We've heard from Zach Polanski, south of the border, that it's as much about trans rights, it's as much about Palestine as it is about the environment these days, is it not?
The Green movement has always been about 4 things. We have 4 shared values, and that is peace, so non-violence, equality, sustainability, that's the environmental part, and radical local democracy. And those are the core values of the Greens, which we seek to advance everywhere. And how that plays out is things like making sure we've got good representation in councils, making sure that when we do things for the environment, like getting free bus travel for young people, it's also putting money back into people's pockets. So much of the good stuff that we need to do to the climate is actually good for people as well, like insulating our homes to make sure that everyone has a warm home that's affordable to heat and is good for the environment.
Tell me what your position is, Lorna Slater, on this conversation we've been having around this desk here in terms of mandates for independence. John Swinney was quite clear. He said during this campaign, this is not the time for mucking about. Both votes SNP, basically saying a vote for your party was mucking about with politics. A mandate for a new independence referendum was an SNP majority. The BBC is now forecasting very clearly the SNP are not going to get that majority. Is a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament a mandate for another independence referendum?
I absolutely think so. In fact, I've thought so all along. Every time that there's a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament should have the right to choose to hold a referendum on Scottish independence. And I don't really understand how parties who would deny us a referendum can call themselves Democrats. I don't mind for a second if other political parties want to campaign for the Union. I would welcome that. But to stop a referendum, to stop asking that democratic question, it smacks of cowardice, quite frankly, because I think they think they're going to lose.
But you sound surprised. You can't be, because they repeatedly go down and they get the same answer. How do you change that?
There has to be some change. That it is not plausible in a democratic country to continue to deny a democratic mandate. And of course, Labour have found themselves in difficulty here because they're now splitting the unionist vote 4 ways when there's only 2 independence parties. So the maths isn't mathing for Labour. They're going to lose MSPs in this election like they have in every election. So there needs to be a rethink of how we look at democracy in Scotland and how we respect that democratic mandate to ask the question. I don't mind if Labour want to campaign for the union, that's fine. But to deny asking the question, they can't hold themselves up as Democrats if they're going to keep doing that.
The last time many people have seen you, Lorna Slater, was pictures of you and Patrick Harvey stomping out of Bute House, bruised and enraged at the meeting you just had with Humza Yousaf when he booted you out of government. I mean, it's taken a long time for the Greens to recover from that, and I think there's still probably quite a lot of enmity between the two parties over how all that was handled. There's a new First Minister, of course, now. There's new leadership in the SNP. Would you consider going back into government if that was on offer?
Well, I don't recognise at all what you've just described there.
We saw the pictures.
Yeah, the Bute House agreement came. The Bute House agreement came to the end, but the SNP and the Greens still have many things in common, although, of course, we didn't help the SNP pass their budget last year. They worked with the Liberal Democrats on that, which gives me the inkling that probably the SNP are going to try and run as a minority government, but it is, of course, up to the larger party to approach a smaller party whether they want to do a cooperation agreement. I feel like there's been a misalignment now between where the SNP are on climate. They've rolled back on their own targets, for example, on reducing car kilometres. They still haven't published that energy strategy with the presumption against no oil and gas in it. So I think we're substantially misaligned with the SNP. We'd have to see them come back strongly on their climate commitments, I think, if we were to work closely with them again. But as I say, my gut feel is that they will be inclined to run as a minority government because they know that they can get Lib Dem support sometimes, Green support sometimes, and I'm sure they're happy enough to carry along like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw Stephen Flynn in his acceptance speech in Aberdeen saying to the oil and gas industry, you will have no firmer friend than us. So it seems there will be a long distance between you. Listen, you leave now with our congratulations, Lorna Slater, MSP for Edinburgh Central. We will speak again very soon, I'm sure. We have a new guest on our top table here, Eunice Olumide, model, I don't know, what do I call you? Model, political pundit, commentator, or what?
Fabulous.
Well, there you are. You've said it. You've said it. Better coming from you than from me, that adjective. We're gonna talk about all of that in a minute. The other thing, hey, listen, the Welsh First Minister has lost her seat in the Senedd. So it looks like there's going to be a Plaid government in Wales. It looks like there's going to be an SNP government in Scotland. Sinn Féin are in charge at Stormont. The Celtic nations have parties running them now who are not fond of the union. I wonder what that will mean. We're going to come to that very shortly. Loads more to digest and discuss, and it's not even 5 o'clock yet. It's 1 minute to 5. We're going to get into the regional declarations in a minute. And when you went to the polls yesterday, you will remember you received 2 ballot papers. Lilac for your constituency vote. I didn't know it was they were calling it lilac. And peach for the regional vote. I definitely knew it was peach because everybody's been talking for 6 weeks about the peach ballot papers. These are the ballots that are being counted today to determine who's going to represent you in the Scottish Parliament. A constituency vote counted, and it's easy. Whoever gets the most number of votes in your constituency wins and they become your MSP. The regional votes then counted, and this is where it gets complicated because a formula is applied to determine who's elected. It's called the d'Hondt formula. It's named after a Belgian mathematician who died more than 100 years ago. And it's complicated, but here to simplify it for us is David Wallace-Lockhart.
Well, Martin, there are 129 seats at Holyrood. 73 of the seats are for those smaller, more localised areas, constituencies you just spoke about. And you're right, there's a lilac ballot paper like this for that vote. It lists individual candidates, and you can vote for one of them. The outcome here is simple. The candidate with the most votes wins. They become MSP for the constituency. So that's 73 of the seats. The other 56 seats come from the electoral region you live in. There are 8 wider regions in Scotland. They all return 7 MSPs. The regional vote often gets called the list vote, and that's, as you said, the peach ballot paper. For that one, contains a list of parties, names of candidates they would like to become MSPs. You get 1 vote again here, put your cross next to a party or an independent candidate. These votes for the regional list are all counted after we know the outcome of the constituency votes, and a formula is applied that takes into account how well any party did in the constituency ballot. This is the d'Hondt system, named after that Belgian mathematician. So the more a party wins in the lilac constituency vote, the more their regional list vote, the peach one, gets divided. So we're going to look at an example from the 2021 Scottish Parliament elections. This is the result for the constituency seats in the North East of Scotland region. The SNP won 9 seats and the Conservatives won. Now we're going to fill in the 7 blank list seats using the D'Hondt formula. Now this all sounds complicated, but this hopefully makes it quite clear. Before we start, it's important to stress this is historic data. It's not going to tell us anything about today's vote. So look above here and you'll see the raw regional vote tallies from 2021. And as you can see, the SNP comfortably got most votes, almost the same as Conservatives and Labour combined. But the SNP won 9 of the 10 constituency seats in the region. Remember, that's the first vote, and the Conservatives won 1. Now, the way the D'Hondt system works is that the total regional vote for each party gets divided by the number of seats they already have plus 1. So for the first regional seat, the SNP already have 9 seats. Their vote gets divided by 9 plus 1, which is 10. The Conservative vote is divided by 2, their 1 constituency seat plus 1, everyone else stays the same. So the party with the most votes in this round is the Conservatives. They have just over 55,000 votes. They take the first of those 7 list seats. Now, because they have that seat now, their vote is now divided by 3, the list seat they've just gained plus the constituency seat they already had plus 1. That means the party now with the most votes are Labour, so they win the next list seat. Now Labour's vote is divided by 2 due to that seat they just won. This means the Conservatives are largest again, so they take the 3rd seat. Their original total is now divided by 4. They're 3 seats plus 1. Now, despite winning the 3rd seat, they're still the party with the largest total, so they take the 4th seat. Again, their original vote total is divided by 5. The next largest party takes the 5th seat. That's the Scottish Greens. Their vote is now divided by 2, and hopefully we're getting the hang of this now. The Conservatives, once again, have most votes. They take the 6th seat. Their original vote gets divided by 6. The 7th and final seat now goes to Labour again, which means the SNP, who won 41% of the regional vote, failed to pick up a single seat on the list because they'd already won those 9 constituency seats. And the Greens only won 6.3% of the vote, came away with 1 regional seat. So in total, across both the list and the constituencies, the SNP came away with 9 seats, the Conservatives 5, Labour 2, and the Greens got 1. So bear in mind, we've been telling you about the constituency results so far, but because of the D'Hondt formula, the regional or list results can turn out looking very, very different. Martin.
There we are. David, thank you very much indeed. So, you got that? If not, don't worry too much, because they'll do the calculations in the regions, they'll come back and they'll tell us how many seats everybody's got, and we'll explain it to you. If you're wondering why they work it out like that, that was your explanation. Right, listen, Gary Robertson is back with his panel of politicians. Gary.
Indeed, Martin. They were watching very closely. Questions now on the D'Hondt system? No, you're OK. Don't worry about it. I wanted to talk about Wales, actually, and Michael Shanks, particularly from Labour. We've heard that Eleanor Morgan, the First Minister of Wales, the current First Minister of Wales, has lost her seat in this election, and the BBC is projecting that Plaid, the Nationalist Party of Wales, is likely to be the largest party. Given that Labour has ruled Wales for 100 years, this is devastating for your party, isn't it?
Well, it's a very difficult result, and I'm particularly sorry to see Eleanor go, who's worked very hard for a long time. Clearly, these are difficult sets of results right across the country. I think what we need to look at is how we build back from that and look at genuinely how we deliver the change even more quickly that people have voted for. We've talked a lot
Why
today.
has it been so slow? What has been the issue here?
I think we're trying to tackle a lot of things as fast as we possibly can, and some of that isn't being felt in people's pockets, particularly in the cost of living, as quickly as they'd like. So we've got a huge amount more we have to do. We hear that from people. But I think what we also have to collectively, and I think this goes across most of the political spectrum actually, is answer the challenge from people about how politics can change their lives. Because we've got reform here coming in councils and in seats across the country with a populist message that won't actually change their lives at all. It doesn't answer the big problems facing people. We've all got a responsibility to show that politics can change people's lives. I take that challenge seriously as part of the Labour government.
If that Welsh result, then, is as a result of perhaps the government that you're part of not moving fast enough, is the same true of the Scottish result? Is it also down to how Westminster's behaving? Ultimately, is this all Keir Starmer's fault?
Well, look, I think the lesson we genuinely take from all of these results is we hear what people are saying. The voters are always right, and they're telling us that they're not happy right now. And I think the cost of living is one of the major factors in that. People want to feel better off. They want to not be worried about the next thing coming through the letterbox being a bill they can't afford. We've got to do even more work and work even faster to meet that challenge. But none of these questions have easy answers, and I think what we have to be really careful of is looking to people who'll tell you there's an easy answer to this, just blame this group of people for all the country's problems. That doesn't solve any of the problems. It's a hard work ahead of us to get these things right and to really improve people's lives. We're determined to do that, and the message we take quite rightly from the voters today is we need to do a better job.
Well, another question, Shona Robson from the SNP, maybe without easy answers, is the one of independence. We've been discussing what John Swinney actually will do next. The BBC forecasting that he may not reach that 65 figure, that majority. But Plaid Cymru, perhaps the largest party in Wales, Sinn Féin ruling in Northern Ireland, John Swinney in power in Scotland. Does that strengthen your hand somewhat, do you think?
Well, first of all, I hope that Plaid Cymru do win and that they beat Reform, because I think it would be good for Wales and good for change in Wales. I think the electoral landscape is looking very interesting. I think that will heap further pressure on what is already a very weak UK Labour government with a very weak Prime Minister. And I think the point actually made by Bernard Ponsonby earlier on about, you know, democracy requires you to listen to what the public are saying. And there is a real flaw here of a lack of mechanism. There's obviously a mechanism in Northern Ireland, but there's no mechanism for the Scottish people to have their voice heard in terms of the Constitution. That is a real flaw, and I thought that was an important point that you made earlier.
Well, let me put that to Harriet Cross from the Conservatives and Blair Jenkins, who led the Yes campaign on the programme a little earlier, talking about the vote share and how much of a vote share there was ahead of the Brexit referendum and a higher vote share potentially for the SNP in this election. So is there a democratic deficit in Westminster continuing to say no to a referendum?
Throughout this election campaign, John Swinney has said if the SNP get a majority, that's a mandate for independence. The SNP, by all accounts, does not look like they're going to get a majority. So what does John Swinney do?
But if there's a pro-independence majority, does that give a mandate?
What John Swinney do? He moves the goalposts, because that's what John Swinney and the SNP always do. Any excuse to have a fight with Westminster, any excuse to sound like they're being badly done by, any excuse to keep the conversation on independence because it covers all the other failings.
Does a pro-independence majority
government
constitute a mandate for this?
The pro-independence majority, which John Swinney said throughout this campaign, was based on the SNP.
But let's say he's in that position with the Greens. They form a pro-independence majority within the Parliament. Does that constitute...
Did the Greens run solely on an independence mandate agenda? No. Did the SNP run solely on an independence manifesto? No. Are they saying that every single person in Scotland who yesterday voted for the Greens or voted for the SNP did so solely on independence? No. The number of doors that I have knocked on in this campaign and the number of times independence has been brought up for me as the primary concern, I can count on one hand.
Well, that's why there should be a vote to decide that question.
I'm sure that's the same with other constituencies as well. It's manufacturing an argument, manufacturing the fact that the SNP need to keep their reason of being, which is why they need independence on the agenda.
Lord Jeremy Purvis, who's joined us, Liberal Democrat peer. Where do you stand on this? Is there a democratic deficit if we have a majority of MSPs in the Parliament who are pro-independence?
Well, it was the SNP and the Greens in the last Parliament in Holyrood that didn't believe that they had the mandate. That's why they went to the Supreme Court. And Nicola Sturgeon took the legal route. The Supreme Court said that there is a constitutional mechanism for it. Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, John Swinney's Deputy First Minister, accepted that. So if they are going to have a U-turn on their previous position, they'll have to be honest about it.
But it could be granted by the Prime Minister, couldn't it?
No, the Supreme Court ruled on it because the SNP took it to the Supreme Court. That was
and said it was reserved to Westminster.
That was
so
their
Westminster can decide.
But that's the mechanism. That's the mechanism. So if the SNP want a different mechanism now, going forward, they have to be honest with people after the election.
So are you saying that there is no mandate here for a referendum
well, they themselves,
if there is a majority of pro-independence MSPs?
It's not me saying so, it's not anybody else saying so, it's they themselves said that they wouldn't have it. And I think the reason why our vote has grown, and we are optimistic of further gains in Scotland, is that there are people across Scotland that want the next 5 years of the Scottish Government to be focused on care services, cost of living, rural transport, GP services. The last thing that they want is yet another 5 years of constitutional wrangling, which will set us back in Scotland.
John Molyneux's next to you from the Greens. We heard Lorna Slater a little earlier, former co-leader of your party, talking about the fact that she believes that there is a mandate here if there is a pro-independence majority. How important is it in terms of the Greens' priorities for this next Parliament?
I mean, I think the new Parliament has a really big job to do in terms of meeting people's immediate needs, cost of living, all those sorts of things. So that absolutely has to be the focus for the new Parliament.
So at what stage should independence come to the fore?
I would absolutely disagree with Jeremy. We live in a representative democracy. On any other matter, being able to command a majority in the Scottish Parliament would be recognised as the will of the people of Scotland, because that's who they've elected to make decisions in the Parliament. So I think there's a very clear sense that a pro-independence majority, which we are going to get at the end of this election,
set aside all of the Supreme Court
is going. We live in a representative democracy, and I think that has to be the cornerstone here. A pro-independence majority. If that vote comes before the Scottish Parliament and a majority of MSPs support it, I think that should be a mandate for a referendum.
Well, Jimmy McGuire from Reform, is there an argument here that says if you're confident enough about your position in terms of the union, then what do you have to fear from allowing people to have another vote?
Well, voters vote on a range of issues in an election. It's not just they vote for a party on one specific thing. What voters want and what we've heard on doorstep is a cost of living crisis. Our solution to that is reduced taxation. Obviously, we pay the highest tax in the UK, and we want to reduce the tax bands and then reduce it to free bands like we do in England.
But if the cost of living crisis eases within the 5-year term of this next Parliament, is there a point where actually you can look at whether or not there's a democratic deficit in holding another independence
It's a
referendum?
distraction from the day-to-day issues. We've got a crisis in NHS, we're falling down the world rankings in education, and we've got a drug crisis. We need to focus on building more social homes, we need to focus on aspiration, building a wealth economy, putting more money in people's pockets. I believe that the SNP have used independence as a distraction from the day-to-day issues, which affects voters on a daily basis, and that's what we need to focus on.
Well, for the moment, thank you all very much indeed. Let's head back to Martin.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. I was saying we have a new guest at this desk on the 4th floor, Eunice Olumide, model, political commentator and fabulous, her adjective. None of us are disagreeing. What are you making of it? You've been taking notes copiously, looking at your phone the whole time all these guys were talking. What are you thinking about what you're seeing this afternoon?
I think that overall, in general, I'm actually I know, kind of like looking at the figures, right? And I think in general, even though voting is probably a lot lower in general, if we go back to previous times, I do think that there is still something quite energising, particularly here in Scotland, in terms of having this feeling that something different might just come about. And I think that you do see that quite clearly. I think going into this, when I was looking at the polls, of course, SNP were around about 30, with Lib Dem and Conservatives, more around 10, 13. And then, of course, we've got the Green Party and Reform coming through. But I do think that there is something that is still quite exciting. And I think that, generally speaking, that there is a lot of potential. And I think that's what I love about Scottish politics in general, is that you never quite know what's going to happen. And I think that's quite important.
Except we're just about to get the same party back in control of the Parliament.
Yes,
It'll be 24 years by the time the next election comes along.
Yeah, of course that's true. But at the same time, I think if you look at what's happening with the Green Party and so on, I don't think people could have predicted what's happened both in Scotland and, in fact, in England regarding that.